Well, hello and welcome to The Print. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. You would have seen the beautiful Republic Day parade, where, of course, the French President Emmanuel Macron was the chief guest. Uh, Now, what does this visit really mean for India? And what is between India and France beyond just the usual, that is, the defense and strategic? What about the people to people ties? What about the business ties? And for this, I have with me Miss Payal Kanwar. Now, Payal is the Director General of the Indo-French Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So she's someone who closely, interacts, and also someone who promotes the business interest from both sides. Welcome to the Print, Payal.
Thank you so much, Snehesh. Thank you for having me.
My first question, when we talk about India France relations, everything goes down. People tend to focus on the Scorpion submarines, the Rafale fighters, the jet engine technology. So, what is beyond all this? What is happening between India and France?
Well, Snehesh, firstly, I'd like to say that this two-day visit of, the state visit of the French president to India as chief guest for Republic Day is an extremely important visit. I mean, firstly, this is the sixth time that France has been invited as chief guest, which is the highest for any nation. And similarly, last year, when Prime Minister Modi had visited France for Bastille Day, I was a part of that visit. And even then, the honor that was extended to India is extremely rare for any foreign leader. So I think that is really a clear sign, not only for both countries, but for the world. Now, in terms of the trade and economic and business relationship between both countries, it is a very strong and key pillar of the bilateral relationship. So if we look at on the investment side, since the past 10 years, since 2013 till now, investments have grown by 8x. Currently, France is the seventh largest foreign investor in India, and FDI stands at about 25 billion euros, which has, really consistently grown over the years. And we currently have more than 700 French companies that have set shop in India across sectors. So it's really quite multifaceted. These companies are also generating important jobs, because that is also an important, side to the entire relationship. There are about 450,000 jobs that are generated by these companies in India, and it's really diverse in terms of sectors. So, of course, while we have defense and aerospace as a large chunk of the trade and investment relationship, there are also many other sectors, whether it's, infrastructure, transport, energy, consumer goods, IT, technology. So maybe I'll stop there and let you ask me your next question.
Well, interesting that you mentioned it. That the FDI is about $24 billion. That's what you said,
Yes,
right?
25.
So if you walked in the streets of any part of the country, a metropolitan city, and if you ask them, what do you remind of when you say France? I think besides, of course, the Rafale. Now people know about Rafale. Is the Eiffel Tower, which is mentioned, and the other thing is wine. So when you say $24 billion FDI into India, and about 700 French companies operating here, if you could tell our viewers, what are the main companies, French companies operating in India?
I mean, like I said, it's really across sectors. So, of course, if you look at on the energy side, we have companies like Total Energy, we have EDF, infrastructure and smart cities. We have companies like Veolia in the water sector. We have Aegis in, engineering services. On the IT side, we have companies like Capgemini. In fact, Capgemini is the largest employer in India. They're generating about 180,000 jobs. Consumer
Wow.
goods, companies like L'Oreal, companies like Pernod Ricard in wine and spirits, of course, automotive with companies like Renault and Stellantis. So the list is really quite long. And what we see is it's not only just the large groups, there are also more and more SMEs and mid-sized companies that are also actively looking at India. In fact, we've had some interesting acquisitions as well by mid-sized companies, because it's also an interesting way to kind of penetrate the Indian market. Now, generally speaking, what we've seen in terms of trends also is that India today represents a key priority market because, of course, the economic growth rate, given the large domestic consumption, these companies are now more and more willing to also see how they can make in India and contribute to India's manufacturing footprint, of course, with the government policies that have come out over the past couple of years. So I think this is really what we're seeing more and more of. And what's also interesting is post-COVID, now, of course, COVID is well behind us, but we were talking a lot about the China Plus One strategy and how is India attracting more make in India? And we do see a lot of ground reality of how things are transforming, and there is also a new supply chain that is developing in the country. And India is also becoming home to global exports for a lot of these companies. For example, Alstom, as you would know, is involved in a lot of the key metro projects. And they have been exporting, out from making in India and then exporting to the world. Same goes for companies like L'Oreal.
Well, that's interesting that you're mentioning that the French companies are not only coming and selling stuff here, but they're actually selling stuff to the world,
Yeah.
right? So, while of course there has been an apex in terms of trade between the two countries since 2013, there is still no FTA, right? Of course, France is part of the EU, so you can't have a FTA specifically with France, but with the European Union. What is the status of the FTA negotiations?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you rightly said, their negotiations have restarted. There have been a few rounds of negotiations. In fact, the chief negotiator was in India last week. There was a meeting that was organized. So negotiations are going on and things are looking positive. I would say the main aspect is really, I mean, if we look at just at trade between India and France, we're looking at a bilateral trade of about 15 billion euros. Now, the objective that was set between Prime Minister Modi and President Macron back in 2018 was to achieve 15 billion by 2025. So this was actually achieved 3 years before, before time, which is obviously good. But I mean, there's much more scope on the trade side. Now, of course, India and the EU are negotiating. And I would say that maybe there are 3 or 4 main aspects. Number one is to work towards reducing tariff barriers, regulatory barriers to enable market access. The second is investment protection. The third is geographical indications. And in fact, IFCI, as one of the key bilateral chambers of commerce in India, we are a part of a task force wherein we have come together with all of the other bilateral chambers with the support of the EU delegation in India. And we are soon going to be launching the first ever European chamber in India. It's going to be called FEBI. And one of the main, objectives of this organization of FEBIs, which is the Federation of European Business in India, is going to be to drive policy advocacy dialogue for European businesses in India with the government authorities.
Well, that's good news that there's a European Union, a policy group which is policy advocacy group which is coming up, and that brings me to my next question. For example, uh, the French companies are now investing in India. They're setting up shops. You said that they're acquiring Indian companies also, the MSMEs and the SME in the MSME and the SME sector. But you interact with all these French companies. In your sense, what is the roadblocks that they face when it comes to investment in India? And what do you think? Anyways, so I'll ask the second part later, but what do you think are the roadblocks?
See, I mean, naturally, India is obviously a huge market. I mean, we say India is one India of many Indias because of, I mean, we have, we have many states. We have, of course, a central government. We have state governments. It's a country which you need to understand and which you need to know how to navigate. So, of course, we provide a lot of support to companies on the ground in terms of hand-holding, in terms of, making them understand market dynamics, making them meet potential partners, et cetera, et cetera. Key issues, I would say mainly, I mean, there are obviously issues on the regulatory side, but we've always had very positive and open conversations with the government authorities, I must say. I mean, every year we organize what we call these investment conclaves. So we have a dialogue with state governments and we bring potential investors to the table. And I can say that maybe 95% of these issues are generally always resolved. I mean, really, without any hiccup. So in that sense, it's quite a positive relationship and dialogue that we have. And there are always issues, like, in any country, a lot of, a lot of perception, when we talk about India, and especially when I go to France, I'll get a lot of, oh, India is so complicated. We say India is not complicated, it's complex, but you just need to understand the country in the right way. So, yeah, I mean, of course, these issues are across the board, whether it's on taxation, whether it's on, sometimes land access, whether it's in terms of talent, whether it's in terms of dealing with local authorities. But I would generally, I mean, overall, I would say that it's quite a positive outcome.
Well, that's good to know. And I like the way that you described it, that India is not complicated, but complex.
Yeah.
Uh, I think having dealt with the Defense Department for so long, I think that's where the complication comes in. But Payal, if there's a way to make it much easier, not just for the French companies, but for the global companies to come and set shop in India, and that is something that the current Narendra Modi government is focusing on. What would be your suggestions? What can be done?
I mean, okay, so on one side, I feel already a lot has been done. I mean, since this government has been in power, it's been now, what, it's been 7 years, right? 2014 or 9 years, right? So I would say that, I mean, right from the start, there were so many policies that were introduced. There was a single window system, there was easing up, the time that is required to set up a legal entity in India. Uh, like I said, the single window process, approvals and permits. I think on the compliance and regulatory side, a lot of aspects have become way more easier. And of course, I mean, the government is pushing for more investment, to come into the country. We saw also, and this year's budget is also, hopefully going to be interesting. We'll see what's announced. But I think that generally speaking, even when you are not in India, I think today no one can ignore uh, the country and the kind of potential that India represents to one's business. In fact, we've seen a lot of new businesses um, either keenly looking at how to enter India. I mean, just last year, in fact, just in the month of November, we organized a huge sort of a conference on the luxury sector. Now, luxury, in my opinion, of course, luxury is synonymous with France, but in India, it's still nascent. But what we're seeing now is that since the past, I think maybe 12 to 18 months, something has sort of changed. There's more real estate, opportunities. Of course, we've seen what's happened with Reliance in Mumbai and the whole development with the Geo World Plaza. Of course, in North India as well, the boom in e-commerce. So these opportunities are slowly coming in, and this is being noticed also by foreign companies, and they want to come in and see how they can leverage this opportunity.
Well, that's one way of that's good news that even the luxury companies are now focusing on leveraging the Indian market. Uh, but you know, as I said in the very beginning, when it comes to India and France, defense plays a key role. When you talk about the bilateral trade between the two countries, defense forms a major chunk of it, right?
And
Be
of
it,
course,
and in the
communication.
future also you have the deal for the 26 Rafale Marines that would be inked. Then you also have a deal for additional Scorpion submarines that would be inked, which will again, increase the total number of the volume of trade between the two countries. But if you leave out defense, which are the other sectors, according to you, that has the potential to shape the future of the bilateral trade and investment between the two countries?
I mean, I think on the goods and services side, a lot of this is going to be dependent on how these negotiations shape up, because that will open naturally, that will open a lot of doors. But I mean, I think a key priority also for the government in India and France is, so there are two things. One is, of course, how to boost on the investment side, I've already spoken quite a bit that, investments are obviously, very well spread out and growing. I think there is a willingness and a focus on how to increase more French exports to India and how to increase more Indian investments into France. So currently, Indian companies in France, we didn't talk about this, but we have about 100, close to, yeah, so 170 Indian companies that have set up in France. And I think that there's a clear willingness also of the French government, and that is going to be one of the focus areas of the president, the French president, because during the program, I mean, during his stay, he is going to be meeting also with top Indian industrialists, but it's to see how, and France is positioning itself as a gateway to Europe. Of course, following Brexit, there have been a lot of reforms also taken by the French government to attract foreign players to set shop in France. And I mean, today we do see again a lot of interesting, like for example, Motherson is one of the top employers in France. We have Electrosteel, we have Aurobindo Pharma, we have all of the main IT companies, HCL, TCS, Infosys, Wipro. Biocon recently made an acquisition last year. So I think that is really a key focus point. But coming back to your question, I think on the trade side, it's really going to also be largely impacted by the FTA.
Okay, so the FTA, and by when do you think the FTA can be done?
Let's see. I mean, I'm no expert, but I know that, I mean, the fact that the conversation, there was no dialogue for, I think, the past couple of years. It was around 9 years that there was no negotiation, and now it's resumed. We are hoping that something positive will come, hopefully this year or in the next 12 months.
Well, God willingly, that's something that both countries would be looking forward to. But thank you so much, Payal, for speaking to the print and bringing to our audience the perspective of the economic and the trade ties between the two countries and the future of it. Thank you so much, Payal.
Thank you so much. Thank you.